Hi, I'm Anita Walker at the Mass Cultural Council, and welcome to our culture chat today. I am so happy to have with us Marquis Victor with Elevated Thought, one of our amazing creative youth development programs. And Marquis, you are one of the most inspirational people I've ever had the privilege to have a conversation with, and I'm so glad that you're going to be with us today. As everybody knows, this moment, this 1 o'clock moment that we have a couple of times a week is really intended to inspire and elevate, and elevated thought, therefore, is a perfect companion to this moment. Marquis, before we kind of get into what you're doing now, especially in the midst of this pandemic, tell us about you and tell us about elevated thought.
Yeah, for sure. Marquise, first of all, thank you for those kind words and thank you for having me. I always love catching up with you, Anita. Yeah, so Elevated Thought is an art and social justice nonprofit based in Lawrence, Massachusetts. We actively serve and develop communities through creative youth development, beautification projects, youth organizing, public outreach. And we work primarily with Latinx youth between the ages of 13 and 22. And yeah, we're embedded in the community and expand our work to engage different pockets of, ages and people in the community as well through our work.
How did you get into this work? You have a story about how this all began. Share this.
Yeah, so, I'll try to synthesize it a little bit, but, I went through my own trials and tribulations and, growing up, creativity was really a way for me to grapple with the world around me, being a biracial kid. And also, my growing curiosity when I was younger, whether it was through drawing or poetry or just exploring, asking a lot of questions, it was really embedded in how I operated as a child when I was really young. But as I got older in high school, I kind of shunned my creative impulses. And, instead of now creating to grapple with my surroundings, I got into destructive behavior. And, I hit a difficult point in my life. And at that point, creativity reemerged. And I started asking those big existential questions again through poetry. Who am I? What am I doing? What's the point of it all? And that allowed me to build a foundation of self. And when I started to build a foundation of self, I was able to put my mind and eyes towards the social landscape, ask some difficult questions about the world we live in, and that kind of merged my, creativity with social justice. And that's kind of how the origins of ET started.
As you were just talking, and you've shared that story with me before, but it resonated in a different way as we sit here in the midst of a pandemic and everyone alone at home or sequestered at home or jammed into an apartment with a large family, quarantining themselves. And I think probably a lot of people are posing that existential question to themselves, sitting home alone. How would you share your use of the creative thought process and poetry? How could others use that right now if they're sitting at home thinking, man, I don't know what the point of all this is. If I have to stay like this for who knows how much longer, I don't know if I'm going to make it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it starts off, I think, with, my belief that we're really naturally creative and curious creatures and beings. And I think the world can, just dry that out. I mean, I experienced that firsthand. But, we get caught up in this, just day-to-day grind. A lot of people, they just have to survive on a daily basis, figure out how they're going to put food on the table for their family. So having time to create or think existentially, that can be a privilege, in a lot of situations. And I think during this time where so many people are in a similar situation where they're limited at their home, even the simple act of opening up and just doodling, just taking some time to breathe and thinking, that's really different from how most people were operating before this pandemic, including myself. The amount that I'm creating now compared to how I was operating before this hit it's dramatic. I have way more time. I'm creating in some capacity every day. And it has really allowed me to not just reevaluate how I was living before, but, purposefully reevaluate ET you know, enjoy and revel in my family, and, you know, be in gratitude for the privileges I have. You know, I have a job still, I have a family, I have health. So, you know, by taking a time to step back and to create, it allows that reflection, I believe. And that's why I think it's so important in situations like these.
We're going to be spending a little bit of time today talking about youth, youth employment, the barriers to employment for youth, and what this pandemic has done in terms of extending the sight line to the possibility of employment for young people. But before we get into that conversation, I want to welcome again the people who've joined us on Facebook Live and on the Zoom chat, and remind you that down at the bottom of your screen is a little button that says Q&A, and we would love for you to push that button and send a question, share a story, share a concern, share your own experiences with us. Tell us how you are finding more time for creativity during this pandemic when you have more time at home alone. But Marquis, talk a little bit about what you have learned and experienced with the young people who participate in your program as they have ambitions toward, you know, the basic making a living wage so that they can live a decent life.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for a lot of our young people because, you know, there's this great gap in understanding and education in terms of, you know, what does making a wage mean? Does that mean you know, you're on a path to just do the bare minimum to survive because opportunities weren't available to you? Your mind wasn't open to the possibilities that you have, especially, you know, creative young people who, you know, they have this such a great wealth of creativity and imagination that slowly dries up as they're working their way through school because, you know, they don't have enough opportunities in school. And out of school, it's limited because as they get older, they have more responsibilities. And so, you know, you find a lot of young people that are kind of, you know, grappling and figuring out what they want to do, you know, when, you know, young people in other areas that might be a little bit more affluent, a little bit more privileged, have that opportunity to ask those questions way early on. So for our young people, especially now, you know, there was this kind of screeching halt with the pandemic, and, you know, it caused a decrease in motivation and creativity. And for us as an organization, we have such a young staff. You know, we just needed to work on internally building community again and supporting one another and asking those questions. Well, how can we support you? Like, you know, with your career, how can we support you, you know, with little opportunities, elevated thought, though it was changed drastically because of the pandemic and a lot of our operation was shut down. And just other young people that are now alumni or graduating college that have come back to the city, you know, and they don't have those opportunities that they were on this trajectory to, you know, work in the science field. Like I mentioned before, now they can't because that job is no longer available because of the pandemic. So they're at home, and now they just have to worry about getting some job so they can contribute to the income at home. So there's a great diversity in the challenges that our young people are facing right now when they're thinking about career and they're thinking about, you know, the economic impacts for themselves and their families.
I know you've participated in some of the conversations with your colleagues around Massachusetts and around the country on the weekly call-in Zoom meetings that we have with our creative youth development groups. What are some of the strategies that are being discussed here in Massachusetts and across the country? What are people thinking about? Because this was an issue before the pandemic, and now it is enormously exacerbated by it.
To be honest with you, it's been many, many, many more questions than answers. I don't think for the most part people have answers. There's ideas, you know, but I really think the feeling that I've garnered from a lot of these conversations is the need to start slow and start personal. A lot of the young people in those CYD calls, for instance, you know, with their teachers that had continued to kind of push work on them, they've been kind of shut off and discouraged from that approach. Whereas some teachers or, you know, staff in some of the organizations that they're a part of have asked, hey, how are you doing? How can I help in a little way? How can I support you? What's on your mind? What do you want to do during this time? Based on what you want to do, how can I find support in that way? So I think it starts with asking questions and continuing a dialogue with young people, and this opportunity to reflect and those things that weren't working, be it through employment or just education, which is an ongoing conversation, obviously. How can we personalize this problem? How can we have more intimate conversations with our young people? And it's difficult. A lot of these young people, they're in situations in schools where, for instance, there's 3,000 students for one guidance counselor. So these type of questions are difficult to have. But how can we just be more intentional with our approach and engaging with young people and ask them more personal questions so we can have a greater understanding of the needs that they have? And so that would kind of provide the framework for these answers that we need to come up with.
Thinking back on when you were in high school, and you mentioned that you had been a creative person, but by the time you were in high school, that wasn't part of your life, and it only came back later. So now we have all these young people at home, and as you said, their teachers are making them digital assignments or Zoom assignments or things to do on their laptop. Do you think you, given the opportunity in the same situation, could have rediscovered your creativity at a time like this?
I guess it would all depend on, if I was getting an opportunity to kind of build my consciousness. Like I was very ignorant when I was in high school, and had I been in this pandemic and without, after already shunned my creativity, I don't know if I would have, something would have, magically clicked during that time. Who knows? Maybe some magical moment would have happened that sparked this interest, this reinterest in my creativity. But I can imagine that it's extremely difficult during this time. If young people have already, kind of moved away from those practices and they're inundated with school and the Zoom calls already, what would be the best approach to engage them? So we talked about that within Elevated Thought as well, when we were like, all right, so do we then transition some of our after school programming online, our in school programming online? And we did a little kind of focus group and asked some of our young people, and they were like, I don't think I'd be engaged with it just because I have to be on Zoom from 9 to 2 every day, or I have all these homework assignments, and then they're hopping on and watching Netflix all day, so they're kind of just drowned by the amount of screen time already. So we decided to make kind of open-ended projects to get them engaged. And maybe had I seen one of these open-ended projects, like, hey, here's a coloring book, hey, here's an organization might put out a weekly prompt. Here's a weekly prompt. Just write if you can. Find some time to write. So there's not a lot of pressure to kind of, create. You need to use this time to create. But here's an opportunity if you have time, just here, and just be consistent with the opportunity. So, there might be that moment. And had I been a young person in this world and seen one of those opportunities, maybe I was just exhausted from all the Netflix that I've been watching or whatever, the video games that I played, and I was scrolling on social media and I saw this prompt. Maybe something would have hit me inside and I'll be like, you know what, I'm gonna take a break from all this and I'm gonna create. And maybe that would have been the gateway. So I feel like that's been our approach, like thinking about things that way. Here's a little bit, here's a little opportunity. Take it if you want to, but be consistent in offering those opportunities for young people.
Could you share a couple of the prompts? What are some examples?
Yeah, sure. What's something that you miss? What's something that you miss? Why do you miss it? Since this pandemic started. What's something that made you smile in the past week? And we've done those prompts internally, right? And that's been great for us as a community, as an organizational community, just kind of bonding with one another, having conversations. And then we start off small and then we get a little bit deeper. It's just like, what's one way you have changed during this time, during this pandemic? what's one thing that you've learned about society since this pandemic hit? And so these type of prompts allow people to, slowly but surely go deeper, 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 and to share with a small group. And so we can have these kind of socially driven, but while also introspective conversations.
Have you heard some insights from this exploration that stuck with you or seemed especially profound and insightful?
I mean, one thing that's really personal is just, one of our young people is like, as soon as we're able to get back in our headquarters, I want to hug everybody, and I don't want a time limit on that hug. I just want to hug you as long as I need to. I want to just feel your heartbeat. I want to hug you. And that's a beautiful sentiment. Everybody was kind of getting choked up a little bit because that's such a feeling that everybody has, not just in this organization, but thinking about family members that we haven't seen in such a long time. I saw my mom for the first time, in almost 2 months, and we hugged, and it was the longest hug I've ever given in my entire life. So you feel something like that human connection. And I think that's inextricably linked to creativity. There's so many fantastic artists that are just flourishing right now creatively. I'm using this time to push the boundaries of the creativity, even young folks within ET. But, I would say through my experience, the vast majority of people flourish creatively when they're around other creatives and they're around other humans, when they have that community that they love that supports them. And I think, that's something, that comment that I just made about the young person saying she just wants to hug everybody in here. It ties back into that, and that's why it really stuck.
Just verbalizing that, just saying it out loud, I know everyone who is joining us in this conversation is feeling just that visceral need for a hug. We have a couple of questions that have come in on our Q&A, and I encourage everybody else who's on part of this conversation to just click that button, or if you're on Facebook Live, just send us a question or a comment on the chat. This from Don Heinen, who is one of our wonderful Mass Cultural Council colleagues. Don asks, as we move from relief to recovery as a sector, how can we be building in more equity into a new normal for our young people? We know that diversity, inclusion, equity is something we're all striving for. Its absence, quite frankly, is a legacy, unfortunate factor of our field. So as we're rebuilding, how can we build that in?
Yeah, well, what up, Don? I like Don. So for me, I think it's very, very basic. We need young people at the table more frequently for more pieces of our social structures that are being decided, and it's beyond just voting, because you have to be 18 to vote, but why aren't we talking to kids in middle school and elementary, middle school, early high school, about their needs, about things that aren't working? I think we wait too long to listen to young people, and then oh, this isn't working, oh, the young people don't like this, and then you have a small group of people making these huge decisions behind closed doors and then rolling them out. Maybe you have your performative youth engagement, as we've seen in many situations, but what happens before these major decisions are made? You're getting young people, their narratives, their stories, their testimonies, their voice, and their needs at the forefront of these conversations. I think when we talk about advocacy, it has to start there. I mean, what are we doing otherwise? If we're trying to make, work with our young people to create a better future, we're not just talking about creating a better future for our young people. We're really talking on a wider human level right here, to allow young people and their creativity and their innovation to have a seat at the table. I mean, they see things that we don't as adults, or things that dry up in us as adults, and they don't know all the answers. I'm not saying that by any means, but we're really doing ourselves a disservice, both on a community level, statewide level, national level, really global level, when our young people aren't at the table, and their needs aren't really broken down, internalized, and discussed.
We have another question. Thank you, Marquis. That wonderful answer. Charles Baldwin, another one of our wonderful colleagues, writes, often we look to young people to sort out all these virtual platforms. How might organizations activate this skill set and hire or employ youth to lead the way across the digital landscape?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that's something that we're thinking about too. And I think there's two pieces to it. You have to think about, the desires and needs of the young people in terms of what they want to do on, with technology and a platform, and also the needs of the organization, where the organization is, where the organization wants to go, and kind of bring those two pieces at the table and figure out what blends, what works. I think we have to be careful also about, because young people have this savvy when it comes to technology, to kind of imposing that responsibility onto them. It might not be something that they want to do. It might not be something that, is part of their vision of what they want to contribute. So I think we just have to be careful about it. And I think, again, it just comes back with having a conversation. I can take my organization, for instance. Okay, this is what we do. This is kind of the pieces from this pandemic that we learned. We want to continue to do this digitally. We want to continue to make sure that there's this engagement piece to our organization for people in the community remotely. Who's interested in this? How do you think you can contribute? And that's where the conversation starts.
I want to get back to the incredible talent and creativity of the young people in your program. And quite frankly, a creativity, to your point, that we routinely fail to tap into and to include at the table in conversations about how we're making our communities inclusive places. But you've also brought along some of the work of the young people in your program. Carmen, who is our behind the scenes technical wizard, can show us a couple of those images. And Marquis, if you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this is a part of our zine that our young people created. Two of our program director, Amaryllis, and our curator, Celeste, when the pandemic hit, they were really quick to develop an emergency fundraiser for our young staff, just to give them a little something, considering that so much of the in-school and after-school programs, or all of the in-school and after-school programs here at Elevated Thought headquarters were done. Commissions were done. So, they wanted to create a fund in which young people could get a little something to support themselves and their families during this time. And those who donated got access to the zine with all our collaborating artists and young staff. And this piece right here is from one of our collaborating artists, JV, an incredible poet and emerging photographer.
That's wonderful.
This right here, yeah. So Amaryllis did this. We released coloring books for the community. So every one of our staff members and collaborating artists, they picked 4 to 5 designs and they turned them into a coloring page. And we're offering that up, their PDF downloads for the community. We have one being released every week. And we've also been able to drop those off at, local restaurants that are serving the community, because not everybody has a printer at home. So we're making them available in that way too. So that picture was kind of just a digitized version of our staff that Amaryllis did.
That's fantastic. Have another question. This one also from Charles Baldwin. What organizations are working with youth and gaining their trust and responding to direct needs as they are identified?
Yeah, well, I can speak on this great event that me and Elevated Thought were fortunate to be a part of last week, organized by Youth Development Organization, led by Mark Camper, and it was a youth summit for Lawrence, and was broken down into different age groups. So you had middle school students who are, they're able to work during the summers. You have younger high school students, older high school students. Lawrence youth that are underclassmen in college, and Lawrence youth who just graduated college. And so we had these breakout sessions, and we're asking very similar. I got to facilitate the one with the college young people that just graduated, and we had other community members involved with the conversation. Groundwork Lawrence Public Library, a lot of great organizations. And it was a platform for the young people to talk about their experience, their concerns. You know, a lot of young people, they come back, they have summer employment. How's that going to work? We had Lori Trahan talk to our young people. Christina Minacucci was in our group as well. We had the director of Mass Hire in the city, Abel Vargas. He was able to talk to the young people too and talk about their approach and their plans for summer employment. And for, you know, organizations like myself, we got to talk about, you know, how our young people are going to adapt, how are we going to adapt to continue to provide opportunities for our young people. Largely, though, it was to hear their concerns so we can take that information and kind of troubleshoot around that and continue to have these conversations while we collectively as a community work to find solutions and opportunities for, you know, the great number of young people that typically have and need employment during the summer.
You know, one of the themes of our conversation that I feel like we keep coming back to is sort of like the untapped resource in our young people. What do leaders, what do community leaders, city leaders, elected leaders, what do they need to let go of that's standing in the way of engaging and including young people at the table? It feels like this is not a brand new idea, and somehow we're still not getting anywhere.
Oh man, I mean, you can open up Pandora's box with that question. I mean, golly, I mean, there's so much. There's so much. I mean, unfortunately, we've been plagued for a very long time. This isn't old with humans, but the need for power and accumulation. And, you know, if that's going to be the forefront in how we operate, the disparities and the oppression and the marginalization of certain people it's going to continue. And I don't think, and this maybe sounds a bit cynical, and there are some great advocates out there in the political realm, you know, in the for-profit realm, some great advocates that are progressive in their thought and their action. But I think it needs to just start, you know, on a community level, collectively, with people coming together, having discussions, building concrete ideas that are both needed and logical, you know, and sharing those ideas with other communities in similar situations, and slowly but surely collectively coming together. Because our voices, there's so many more people and so many more voices than, you know, that top tier of people that are making the decisions and creating the environments for society. But it's on us too to kind of commit to progress. I think we have to make decisions. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all hypocrites to a certain degree, right? But I think on an individual level, like, how are we living? How are we contributing to the way things are? How are we kind of just being complacent and allowing things to unfold and hope things change, you know, without, you know, contributing even in the smallest way ourselves? And how are we finding ways to lift the voices up of the people that are trying to be heard, that need to be heard in order for this change that you're talking about to be realized? So I think like everything, it starts small, and it's a very arduous task. But if we can do our small part and can start to build, you know, in the more intimate communities, in the broader communities, I'm speaking like in a place like Lawrence, then a place like the CYD realm and all these connections that we have, you know, and kind of expand across these different sectors and these different communities. I think that's, you know, it sounds a bit utopian, but how else is stuff going to change? Without that, then the systems and structures are going to continue to cater towards, you know, that small number of people that benefit from it.
Marquis Victor, Elevated Thought. You are an amazing leader, and I am so happy that you're in Massachusetts and in Lawrence, making a huge difference Thank you so much for being part of our culture chat today.
I'm grateful to be here, Anita.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.